So good morning, everyone. Welcome to North Carolina Health News's October Healthcare Half Hour. This is a series of conversations that we've launched this summer. They're short, sharp, to the point, early in the morning, and then let you get on with the rest of your day. These conversations are not meant to be comprehensive, but they're meant to spur conversation. And our conversation today is with Melba Newsome. She is a frequent freelancer with us, and she has been writing about the unchecked growth of industrial animal farms and how that's engendered a long fight for environmental justice in Eastern North Carolina. Melba is an experienced and many lauded award-winning healthcare reporter who's based in Charlotte, but she's been spending the last couple months traveling around Eastern North Carolina and interviewing people for this project. And so if it's, I'm going to just jump right in and ask Melba about, this is a struggle between community members in Eastern North Carolina and industrial animal farms. This has gone on for decades. So why don't you give us some historical context about how this situation came about and how these sort of questions and this fight for environmental justice has lasted for so long?
Sure. Good morning, Rose, and thank you for having me, and thank you for publishing this series that is, it's a fellowship project from the MIT Environmental Solutions Initiative, which they are really want to put a spotlight on climate change and the areas that's impacted, kind of where there's a debate about the impact on communities, and particularly communities that feel like it's a choice between their way of life and the environment, that they have to choose one or the other. Mm-hmm. And this has been going on in the eastern part of the state for about 30 years, since Smithfield built the largest slaughterhouse in the world on in Tar Heel, the banks of the Cape Fear River. And it was lauded as what we're going to have this big industrial farm, because there's always been pork producing in that part of the state. And this would be good for the economy. And it has been, very enriching for some people there, but for the majority of people, it's just been a burden of them enduring one environmental injustice after another, and what it's meant for their quality of life and their health in that part of the state. And so that's been going on. It's against, Smithfield also, but also the lawmakers who protect them and grandfather in many of the rules that allow them to operate with impunity in a lot of ways. And so now the poultry industry is a big part of that as well.
Talk a little bit about kind of the milieu down there. Like, what are the, like you say, we talk about health effects and the environment, like what's it like? What do people experience?
Well, it's very rural. And so Sampson County is the largest. Now there's some debate about whether it's Sampson County or I'm blanking on the other county, but it's the largest county by land in the state. And there are about 63,000 people who live there. So it's large, but it's sparsely populated. But these, what they call CAFOs, concentrated animal feeding operations, are concentrated in communities of color. So they're just packed in, so the same people experience the effects of them. And you will be riding along or standing out somewhere, and all of a sudden these smells come up. Because before, when people farmed, they would maybe had hog farms, 20, 30 hogs. Well, now these hogs are concentrated by the thousands. And it's been said that the hogs in Sampson County outnumber the people 40-1. So they're all concentrated in these communities, and you can imagine the smell. And you have these CAFOs where the hog waste is piled into what they are called lagoons, which is a euphemistic term for pools full of hog feces and urine. And you can't see them from ground level because they're hidden behind rows and rows of corn that grow up 20, 30 feet. And so we flew over, and you can see them if you're up 2,000 feet or so. And there are these long rows of hog barns and surrounded by these big pools of feces that are hot pink from the bacteria. And so that's what creates the smell. When they pump that out as fertilizer for the corn, and to fertilize the corn, it creates that smell because it spins out in kind of an irrigation system, and you could be standing there and all of a sudden these huge smells that come up. It's like it's been described as like a decomposing body or something, or rotten eggs. And so people in the summer just have to stay locked inside their homes to get away from the smell, and it's everywhere, and it's very pervasive, and the horse flies are there, and the trucks that go day and night. It really has impacted how people live, and the ability to enjoy their homes and their land that have been in their families since post-slavery, like 4 and 5 generations they've owned these lands.
Right. I mean, I remember that from some of our prior reporting that, people bought those bits of land, bits and bobs of land, back around the turn of the last century. And then, kind of like farmed away. And like you said, had like 20 or 30 hogs maybe, and grew some corn and had kitchen gardens. And, but now things have changed, and there's been some aggregation of land ownership in the area too, right?
Right. Well, the thing is, people now, all of the big farms, from what I understand, there used to be about like 25,000 different farmers who had hogs. Now they're about 2,100, and they have like tens of thousands of hogs. So there used to be these small hog farms just distributed, among a lot of different people. So now they're aggregated, and people get together and, get maybe $1 million to start a hog farm. And the people who own them don't really live in the communities where they're situated. So, and they're like hidden off, like I said, in the woods, and they grow them in different houses, in different farms, till they get to a certain age. And the only time those hogs are moved is when they get to, like I said, a certain age, and then they take them out and transport them to another location until they grow to another size. And so they keep moving them until they take them to the slaughterhouse.
Mm-hmm.
So they go down the highways that way.
So, we're North Carolina Health News, and so we think about the health effects of these things, and these have been studied. What are some of the health effects that have been found in the people who live near these facilities?
Well, one thing, shortened lifespans, and then higher rates of, their infant mortality rates are higher, kidney disease, diabetes. That part of the state has some of the highest COVID rates in the states. So the air quality is worse there. Duke Environmental did a study that showed the different impacts, of the people on the people who live closer to those CAFOs. And it was definitely well documented that there were health effects on the people who live there because the air quality was so bad. And so we see that the groundwater is polluted. When I talk to Kemp Burdett, who's the river keeper there, he was saying that we saw how they are over, quote, fertilizing the land, because it's not just about getting, the spray field system to fertilize it. It's actually a waste management system. They're spraying out way more than they need to get rid of the waste in the CAFOs, and so you could see where the sewage was just pooling there. And this seeps into the creeks and the riverbeds, and actually gets into the Cape Fear riverbed, the watershed. So we have all these problems where there's this seepage and this runoff, and people complained about their, not being able to drink their water and their water being polluted. People who live out there, they're not on municipal water. They have to buy their own drinking water.
And what about their wells?
Yes, exactly. Their, wells get polluted and have to dig new wells. There was a pastor who was warned you can't, drink the water, and they had to dig their own new well and that kind of stuff. So there are all these consequences of living there.
I just want to take a moment to remind folks that you're with North Carolina Health News for our monthly healthcare half hour. You can subscribe to our bi-weekly or twice a week newsletter. The link is in the chat, and it's www.northcarolinahealthnews.org/subscribe. We are also a not-for-profit, and so and we live on the donations of our readers. So please consider making a donation to NC Health News. This morning, we're talking to Melba Newsome about hog farm health effects in the eastern part of the state. Melba, DEQ told us in 2016 that we don't know where all the poultry farms are. You're talking about hogs, but now there's poultry farms. Can you talk a little bit about kind of the rise of poultry in Eastern North Carolina?
Sure. And I want to point out that it's just not Eastern North Carolina anymore, because the point I want to make is that hog isn't boss anymore, okay? Because the poultry farm, they learned from what they considered the mistake of the hog farms was that they allowed themselves to be regulated. So when poultry came in, they have made sure, and the General Assembly had it written in that we couldn't know where poultry farms are. So if they came in unregulated, then they had more, they could do more, and they could put themselves, they didn't have to get this permission to build, so now they're just cropping up everywhere, not just in Eastern North Carolina. When I first started looking at this, it was almost a year ago, and proposing to write about that. I think at the time there were 4,800 that we know of, 4,800 massive poultry CAFOs, concentrated animal feeding operations. Now there are 5,800. So in the span of a year, there are like 1,000 more.
Wow.
They are everywhere. And I found out they're here near where I'm in Charlotte. So as far as we know, there aren't any in Mecklenburg County, but they are all around in Union County, Catawba.
Really?
Yes. And Gaston County, and because they can just crop up, including in the floodplains. And if you see the story we published, there are pictures of if you fly over, you can tell the difference between a hog CAFO and a poultry CAFO, because the hog CAFO has the lagoons. The poultry doesn't have the lagoons because they have dry litter. And they look like huge hay bales. And that's litter. That is poop, okay?
It's like poop and sawdust and others and feathers and stuff like that.
I think it's just poop. And so they are not supposed to have that anywhere close to like the edge where it can get in rivers and streams, and they're supposed to keep it tarped. But even keeping it tarped, Kemp said it's like putting a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound, because that doesn't do much good. It comes over and rain just, can just wash it into the creek. It gets into the creeks and the streams and gets into the watersheds. And they keep it on the edge, and you can just see it moving into, getting into the groundwater, and it's there everywhere. They're not supposed to leave it there for more than 15 days, and you can fly over and see that it's there for months and months. So,
we have a question in the chat asking if there's a map of the hog farm locations and the poultry farms. I know that the river keepers did a map of poultry farms a couple of years ago. What's the status of that? Do you know, Melba?
They're keeping up, and that's part of my project, that to do a GIS to show the growth of poultry farms and the hog farms. I think that was from Reiki, right? Reiki Longest, I think. Yeah, it was a great resource for me on a couple of stories, and I hope he will continue to be, because he's been working in this area for almost 30 years for the Duke Law Clinic. And so, yeah, there are people like he and the different river keepers who, without them, we would be like way more in the dark than we already are on this.
And we have to note Steve Wing, the late Steve Wing from UNC, who did some of the earlier research on this. Yes. I think he died in 2016. So, you bring up the term environmental racism in the story. Where does that term come from? And is climate change adding to this problem too? Because you think about these big storms we've had and the flooding events, how is this all sort of mixed into this big stew?
It is all mixed into this big stew. Well, we talk about, the term environmental racism. Ben Chavis is credited for saying that. Like when he was coming from leading a protest in 1982 in Warren County about the dumping that was going on, chemical dumping that was going on in Warren County, and he was driving back, and the state troopers were following him, looking for him to do something wrong. And they just pulled him over, and he says, well, what are you stopping me for? What are you arresting me for? Oh, you were driving too slow. So they take him to jail. And when they slam the doors on him, he goes, this is environmental racism. This is exactly what this is. And so that term stuck, and it kind of spawned the movement of, that's what it was about. So that's the story as I know it. And it became kind of the rallying cry for the way Black people are treated, the way that the things are set in certain communities, the environmental injustices where people are forced, redlining forces people of color to live in the worst communities, in flood zones, and then the dirtiest industries are then located in those communities, and polluting industries and things like that. Somebody calls it sacrifice zones, and the dirtiest air. And when I was doing the series for North Carolina Health News Rose for the Pulitzer series about the impact of the coronavirus on Charlotte's Black community, it became so clear to me that there was this overlay of the worst. The impact was so tied to the environment. And I was like, everywhere you see the environment and coronavirus are just like linked. And so now you see the Biden administration opened an office about the Office of Health Equity, and they said climate change is a health equity issue. And so it really is. And I saw that in my reporting, how these things, you cannot separate climate change from health equity because
Mhm.
they just go hand in hand. And I'm glad people are recognizing that. And you see that in Eastern North Carolina because the way these things are happening and where climate change is making the biggest impact are in communities that um, like the heat deserts, right? And the heat islands, we would say. And the water is the dirtiest and the air is the dirtiest. And there have just been study after study that show this. And of course, that's where the pandemic had such, great impact.
I think Sampson County has got some of the highest concentrate, highest rates of COVID in the state. Mel, we had a great question in the chat, which is, what does a solution to this issue look like? Right. I mean, one of the things you hear, like you drive around Duplin County, right? And it says like, shut up or put down the bacon or something like that, right? What are things we can do to work to improve this situation? Like, how do we solve this?
Well, if I could tell you that, then I would have a MacArthur Genius Grant and I'd have a Nobel Prize and all of that. Well, the first thing we have to do is let people know that climate change isn't something that's over there, and it's not something that's way out there, and it's not somebody else's problem, and one thing that I feel a bit hopeful about is I would say that 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago, the environmental movement was kind of bifurcated, and people of color felt there was this. There were folks that felt that it was two movements, like kind of Black people thinking we're here dealing with pollution, and then the conservationists are out here concerned with the spotted owl, and we don't have anything in common. And we realize now that this is all one fight.
To use a term of art, it's a little more intersectional than it was.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that is a good thing, that because it's one fight, but it is all, as long as when we get people to understand that this is not a choice between a way of life and protecting a way of life and protecting the environment, because unless we protect the environment, our way of life is just gone.
Mm-hmm. Well, because you have another article that's coming up. This is the first of two, right? And so the second part is talking about policies and lawsuits, right? Like lawsuits have been chipping away at some of this stuff and kind of trying to put a box around some of these issues. Can you give us a preview? What are lawmakers and regulators doing and not doing to address this issue or these issues?
Well, what happens when the lawmakers get to pick their voters versus the voters picking the lawmakers is that the lawmakers, ignore you. And, what's happening in the General Assembly is that we have senators from the great state of Poultry or the great state of Smithfield, and they are not concerned about the people, and they write the laws to make sure that they protect them. And so they have, one of the things was when the people in Duplin and Sampson County were successful in suing Smithfield, they passed a law to cap damages, right? And they make sure that there are few regulations as possible on the poultry. So that is a hard, it's hard to do when you have people in the General Assembly who feel that their constituents is, their boss hog is their chief constituent, and that the poultry industry is who they care about most. The Southern Environmental Law Center filed a suit recently in the last couple of weeks against DEQ for permitting the biogas pipeline, Title VI,
Mhm.
saying that it's a civil rights, violation because it's going to disproportionately impact people of color down there, so there are different lawsuits going on, but it's going to be an uphill climb. And
Mhm.
because Smithfield promised to do things 20 years ago, and they have not really been made to keep their word. And they're
Mhm.
allowed to keep going ahead, with one thing after another. But also, just when people, there's always uh, there are always loopholes that folks can find. And so you just have to, I think the thing is to keep the pressure on our lawmakers and make it very uncomfortable for them. And when you get the activists really engaged, that is I think the best hope we have.
Mhm. I just want to remind folks that you're with North Carolina Health News for our monthly healthcare half hour. We've had a couple of questions. We're coming to the end of the presentation part. If you have a question, we've got a couple minutes to take some questions. Someone here in the chat noted that some countries are using maggots to consume industrial waste, or I'm sorry, agricultural waste, and then using the maggots for high protein food sources for poultry. And GoTerra in Australia is a leader in this area. Kind of interesting. I mean, it's sort of more integrated. Someone else notes that a meat solution is to support local farmers if you want to continue eating meat, and then supporting organizations that do this kind of work. So if there's any other questions, but we have like one other question, tell us a little bit about your experience reporting these stories. What was it like? And, I understand you went up in a plane and, that had to be a little fun, but what was it like to travel around Eastern North Carolina?
It's great to always be out and meet the people who are directly impacted. It's great to meet the folks who give so much of their, themselves and their time to do this, and a lot of times for little or no money, and who get grief from their neighbors. And I have folks who come to me and say, well, I really want to, I want to tell you this, but I don't want to use my name. And I kind of roll my eyes and I'm going, how many people what sacrifices that they make to do this, and you don't want to use your name. But, I know there's a lot of fear because
There's fear. Mm-hmm.
Fear. And, for speaking up against kind of the biggest employer in the area. And so therefore it gives me even greater respect for the people who are willing to, put a lot on the line for this. And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Let me see, Ryan, Riki Longest has responded here that research in North Carolina showed that maggots do not remove the ammonia or odor or ammonia issues, but can be a good part of solution to pathogen spread and solid nutrient issues. So you have to be careful about the species used. So it sounds like there's a lot of work around this that's going on. And I'm looking forward to the next story that you're doing to sort of where you do talk about lawsuits and the way that these issues are being addressed. When are we going to see that?
next week.
Next week. Awesome. That's great. And once again, this reporting was supported by MIT, right?
The MIT Environmental Solutions Network. I was in the inaugural class of the environmental fellows,
Mm-hmm.
both from all over the country. Yeah.
It's exciting to get this kind of support from MIT. We also depend on support from individual readers. We depend on foundation support. We're a not-for-profit, and so we're always looking for mechanisms of support. I know that, there are scientists, researchers, that they always are going looking for support. We're the same way, so please consider making a donation to NC Health News. Also, please consider signing up for our newsletter if you haven't already, and tell other people about our email newsletter. It comes out twice a week. On occasion, we'll ask you for money, but mostly what we're going to do is we're going to send you our headlines and let you know what's happening out there. Melba, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us this morning and talking about your project.
No, thank you for having me. It's been great. I always like contributing to North Carolina Health News.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for attending our healthcare half hour this morning. Stay tuned. We have healthcare half hours every month. We do it on the third Thursday of the month, and we're coming to you from NC Health News. So thanks so much for attending,